Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So everybody, welcome to another edition of the Fatigue Files podcast. And I'm delighted to have with me today my friend and colleague, the amazing Jana Norman. Jana, you may remember, was in the first season of the Fatigue Files talking about forest bathing. In fact, it was the very first episode of the podcast. She's a certified forest bathing guide and Post-Doctoral Research Fellow at Deakin University. And Jana spends a lot of time thinking about the more than human and indigenous cosmovisions and different ways of the whole way of manifesting humanity. And I wanted to talk to her today because not only does she have personal experience of fatigue through long COVID, but she spent many, many hours of her life, not only as a spiritual practitioner, but reflecting on the nature of materiality, the intelligence of materiality itself, and the ways in which matter matters, which those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while will realize is a particular theme of importance to me, because I'm convinced that the body is completely underestimated in many conversations around fatigue and fatigue healing. So, Jana, welcome to the Fatigue Files. It's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. It's wonderful to be back, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too, Jana.
As you're saying, it touches a lot of things that I'm really passionate about as well. So this is great.
Awesome. So, Jana, do you want to quickly fill our listeners in on your own personal experience with fatigue, and then maybe bring into that what you've drawn from your work around the ways in which matter matters?
Sure. Yes. Bit of a different way of talking about it, as you've said, it isn't always a part of the conversation. So I was diagnosed with post-viral fatigue that was very much seemed obvious to my practitioner, my GP, that it was long COVID. But I had fell into that weird category of not testing positive at the right time. But that was about a 9-month journey for the fullness of it. Got COVID either again or for the first time 9 months in, and seemed to get much better until I had it again. But anyway, so yes, I think I've always been able to, even with being someone that thinks a lot about why matter matters or the meaning of matter, and looking to reimagining what it means to be a human being in terms of embodiment and entanglement with material reality. Even with all of that, it was a real wake-up call, or certainly I didn't realize I've been able to ignore my body for a long time. In one sense, I've had rheumatoid arthritis for almost 20 years. So I've just gotten along with that. But then this was something completely different, and felt and was obviously is whole system and quite cellular in my experience of it, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's just so totalizing or total. So then it feels like I got into my body in a very particular, all of the particles way, living with it, because it does affect your whole system. And with the long COVID diagnosis, that they test everything because it's everywhere, and that was an interesting experience. But it continued to feel holistic in that sense, even though you get an EKG and then I had asthma during that time. So there's respiratory and then, like all the parts separate, but they're all functioning with the same resident virus and residue of. So those kinds of things, in the midst of it, I wouldn't say that I was thinking it, but I was living it, I was being it. And that really goes alongside, it enabled me to make this thing that I think about a lot present in my body. Through the forest bathing and through other things, I am very appreciative and practice attunement and attentiveness to the permeability of my matter, my body, and I've had those experiences of receiving from nature a sense of a broader self and a sense of being caught up with everything that is. But that seemed something you could plug into and access occasionally. Whereas fatigue was 24/7, still returns at times to give me that same embodied experience again. And I think I'll never be without that. So I guess what I'm talking about now is that matter has become meaningful all the time, if that makes sense. It was meaningful in forest bathing practice or any practice where you become more aware and you're breathing and you're, so that but now it's all the time.
The thing that really struck me in what you were saying there was the kind of attunement to an almost cellular awareness in the body. And I would say for myself, that's true too, Jana, and particularly the more I've understood about the nature of the way the body functions as cellular intelligences in this glorious cascade or entanglement of communications, because if we think about the mitochondrial hypothesis, that, the idea that the illness is ultimately a mitochondrial response to the pressure the body's under, that makes perfect sense of that experience you had of the medical system disaggregating the analysis into, let's look at respiratory, let's look at the heart, the classic way that medicine kind of separates out body parts and examines them. And all these systems, as you say, affected. So you're living with it 24/7, in part because it actually goes down to the very mitochondria in the cells. And if you've got mitochondrial issues in every cell, it's going to affect every organ, every system, every component. The other thing that struck me was the way that you said that you'd been really reflecting over years, and I know you have, as I have, about the meaning of materiality and materiality's own meaning-making capacities. But the way that it's landed for you, it's landed in your body in a really tangible, different, inhabited, lived, experienced, internal way of a kind of homecoming to your own cellular knowing. Does that sound like a true reflection of what you were saying?
Yes, I think so. And it's the homecoming to the cellular body and the materiality that is also not me. And if that makes sense, because it is. I'm trying to hold space for this being about materiality, not the I or me, but also me. So it's what I find difficult to talk about is this is only a matter of, as it were, a matter of a new kind of awareness for me of a thing that always already is, which is this cellular becoming. So matter is always becoming, always emerging. And that is not between entities, but that is the great sort of primary reality, is this. You can't see me, but I'm moving my hands around. It's the relations, it's the emergence. Things come into being through this relation. So when I'm talking about having this awareness of materiality, the very imminence of it, it is also outside of me, if that makes sense. So it's but those words don't really work, but it's intracellular. And so, yeah, and it sort of just is, but having that experience where, and I notice now, and I don't know if this comes up, if this is where this comes up naturally, but it's popped into my head, so I'll talk about it, which is, so now, in this other place, with having those experiences on board, some things I notice are my capacity or responsiveness that shows up through tears, for example, is much more present. And when it's happening, I know that it's responsiveness that's both mine and beyond me. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And what's interesting here, isn't it, is the layered nature of our awareness of this, because I mean, just in sort of evolutionary biological terms, the neocortex and the capacity for self-reflection and the sense of an I arrives quite late on the scene. And it arrives, as you implied, from emergence. So you've got these cells coming together, forming more and more complex entities over evolutionary time. And a large part of what we are even now is more than human, right? So is it something like, I don't know the precise figure, but I believe Donna Haraway wrote about something like 70% of what makes us up are these tiny cellular non-human intelligences, which, science is increasingly showing that they have a kind of reflective or a responsive capacity of their own that seems to move beyond mere chemical reactivity to some kind of sensing capacity around danger and safety and certain communicative responses. So there's a gut mitochondria axis, there's a brain mitochondria axis. If we have a negative thought, apparently mitochondrial DNA appears in the blood within 3 seconds, which is not where we want it. So there's this whole sense of this vibrant community of communities that make us up. Now, people listening to this might think, well, that all sounds very interesting and exciting, but what does it have to do with getting better from, something like ME/CFS or long COVID? I would say everything, because the sooner we understand that, the sooner we start thinking at the level of the cellular. That leads to very, very simple practices like going out to get sufficient sun exposure. Why? Because sunlight enhances the EZ water that is around cellular structures and means that there's greater mitochondrial efficiency. And lo and behold, it turns out that the further we get into the cellular, more than human nature of the body, the closer we get to very practical insights about how and why we evolved in a certain way. So we evolved to wake with the sun, to get outside, to be moving, to have social relations, to go to sleep certain times. And when you get into the science of it, it's all about why early? Because you've got the red and near infrared spectrum, which protects the skin, so that as the UVA and UVB comes into the sunlight, the skin is more protected. But the UVA and UVB light are also doing unique things in relation with those intelligent cells. And then as the day moves on, you've got all the circadian clocks in the body responding to the angle of light in the sun coming in through the eyes. And apparently, if you wear sunglasses, for example, you're blocking out what the body needs to know about the sun. So you're encouraged not to wear sunglasses for certain periods of the day so that the whole system wakes up. Also, amazingly, eating outside, you have a greater nutrient uptake.
Fantastic.
Some, really simple everyday practices, but it all crucially hinges on precisely the intelligence of materiality itself. This is coming from the body. This is not some top-down operation from a human neocortex that arrived very late on the scene, which is why all the mind over matter stuff needs a balance in terms of we need to think about the emergent intelligence of materiality itself, without which this kind of top-down function in the brain couldn't even exist.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
I know. It's
Yeah.
mind-blowing.
And that sense of, especially with the sunlight, that's such a beautiful image. And in terms of our relationship with nature and with, like we're already we already think of the sun as enlivening and, I'm talking spiritually now, which isn't separate from what we're talking about, but an inflection towards our thoughts and our feelings. And so we're already sort of attuned to the sun, and you can think of flowers that turn to the sun. And so looks like we're just like them. And we also have those responses. And I think what I love about that in terms of a thought and a feeling and a sense of connectedness, or what we might call spirituality, is that immediately we're a part of things. And it's all of a piece. So the highly technical knowledges that you're talking about, that have knowledges of the intelligences of the cells, and it's our cells, and it's sunflower cells and other heliotropic plants. You can put us all in that mix, and it becomes quite participatory in a way that isn't all down to you. You don't have to heal yourself from fatigue or anything else. What we have is an opportunity to participate with the healing that is, with these intelligences that are on board and ready to go. When I was thinking about talking with you about this, what came to mind was a sense of what I really like about thinking about material spirituality, or holistic materialism or something, which includes all these material matters we're talking about, as well as these thoughts and feelings, is that it's all about working with what you've got. And so what you've just talked about is what we've got on board are cells that know what to do with sunlight through our retinas, if we let them, or with corneas, whichever part of the eye is receiving that information, the whole system of the eye, whatever, it's all on board, and whatever, however those things that are on board are doing, they are there, and they have these capacities, and working with them, and it's a sense of participating and working with what we've got. It's glorious to me, because it's all there to be explored and experienced.
Absolutely. And I love what you're saying about being on board, because what you're talking about here is an intrinsic capacities for attuning to these ways of being that are deeply reflective without being introspective. They're interoceptive. So it's about sensing into the body, getting out of the kind of endless thought loops about the body, getting into the body and feeling that cellular intelligence. That we could call it energy. We could, lots of ways that we can lens that, of course, and describe that. But of course, that's a key healing art, the art of coming home to the body as, well, for me, I'm increasingly talking about the body as guru, because for me, this is something that's really missing in large parts of contemporary spirituality, since we've gone that way, that inflection. to me, coming into the body and sensing these guru-like intelligences that are millennia older than us, profound earthling intelligences, and if we're anything at all, we are earthlings. This sensing into the body, when we get really good at it, is precisely what guides us to radical well-being, because as you're saying, the whole heliotropic world and all the nutrient systems, all the communications from both what we call inside and outside the body, all that is already leaning towards flourishing, emergence, capacity. Yes, decay is a natural part of that, and we don't need to fear that. And actually, the cycle of mitophagy, when the mitochondria, when the mitochondria are cleansed, the old crappy ones get pushed out and we generate new ones. That we're always cycling and recycling. There's that sense of flow and rhythms that get interrupted and then flow again. That whole dance of becoming that we see when we really look at nature, when we look at society, when we look at the self and the multidimensional nature of the self, all that is so rich. And coming home to the body in the midst of that is really important practice of healing. And as you say, intimately related to spirituality itself, because I've personally found that the more I get into my body, the more the spiritual energies in my system get liberated, released, and the more I expand as a being, which is an extraordinary thing. And I see that as a form of healing in itself. I think a core part of the spiritual walk is precisely the healing of the self, the ability to get beyond the ego structures that are reactive and small and constrictive and contracting and uncomfortable for others, the ability to just be more capacious and attuned to self and other of human and non-human kinds.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking of sitting with there's so many things. It's really a wonderful conversation, and it's what I get excited about is that there is lots of learning already in this conversation. I've learned heaps about the particulars of what's in the body, what's here to work with, and what is us. And what I get excited about is those things. We're invited to learn those things. It is not imperative. There's no task at hand. There is invitation, and there is, because I find myself resistant to programs or systems, or trying to be good at it, or trying to be perfect, or trying to, it isn't taking it on board perfectly and it's finding out what is on board and being present with it. I was thinking about in the practice of forest bathing, one of the things that there's one of the invitations. So forest bathing is about these invitations to be present in different ways as a cellular entity within nature, and participating together with all the others with whom we're so connected. And so one of the invitations is called, I've started calling it reciprocity, but it's about reciprocity with a tree. And you just go and sit with a tree and recognize that you're breathing in as it's breathing out as you're breathing in. I may have talked about this on the other one because I do love it so much. And what I like about it is that you don't have to know the name of that tree. You don't have to know the genus, the species, the whatever. You can. That's beautiful knowledge. And those systems link us into how it links to other things. Like they're beautiful. But you don't have to know that. You don't have to know what chemicals that tree is giving off that your body is receiving and what you're presenting to the tree. It really is those things are happening. That reciprocity is happening on a cellular level. And 20 minutes of sitting with that is going to be doing things in that recycling process that you were talking about, that whether we know them by name or not, that becomes part of what's already on board. Do you know what I mean? So that's another thing I really appreciate about thinking this way, is that this is not something that you go out and master. This is something that, well, for some of us has come to us thanks to fatigue.
Totally.
I'm not commenting on this being a gift, but since it is here and it is an experience, and it is an experience that has brought me home to body, well, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said invitational. It's an invitation, whether or not you choose to frame it as a gift. I would say that's very much a choice that we make. You know, we don't have to see it as a gift, because some invitations are really tricky invitations, right? And
yes,
for me personally, I have seen it as a gift because it's been my greatest teacher. Before I had MECFS, I was a typical child of the military Roman Catholic child. So I had two systems of belief that were very, very strong external authority structures, neither of which valued the body. The military valued the body as this kind of lump of performative flesh, and the Catholic view of the body was quite denigrating and negative. And so I internalized those things, and I loved bodily life. I've always loved bodily life, but I didn't love my body. Right. And there's a difference between loving my capacity to be able to run up a rope with just my arms, or, you know, beat a 19-year-old boy on the martial arts mat, or whatever it was that I was doing before I got it. There's a difference between that and loving my body. My body was my beast of burden. My body was something I drove. My body was something I trained. My body was something that I overcame in the name of mind over matter performance that my father so strongly ingrained in me as a kind of quasi-soldier child, in effect. Growing up in the military with him in particular was a very interesting experience. And I don't regret it, because it's given me certain things in my life, but I didn't love my body, and I didn't understand its intelligence, and I didn't learn from it. So for me, although my MECFS was horrendous when I first had it, and coincided with a very powerful, energetic, spiritual awakening that I had no previous framework for what happened. So it threw me into absolute turmoil, into a different kind of universe. I didn't know which way was up and all of that. Looking back on it, I have to say that it was the greatest gift, because it flipped the frame on my whole previous existence. Which, if I look at that and I look at the trajectory of that, where that could have gone when it became fully, you know, I probably would have ended up with some other illness potentially, but I think I'd have been a very different person. And you know, I think, you know, although I feel very strongly that the body is a very wise and loving guru, to which I've had to become very attuned, and I absolutely love my body now, and I spend a lot of time listening to its little signals, giving it what it needs, studying what it needs in evolutionary terms so I can love it better. You know, I am my body, but, you know, there's that reflective fold in our relationship with ourselves, right? Even though that's all happened, I also have to say that MECFS has been my greatest teacher too. Would I rather not have had it? You bet. You bet I'd rather have not lost 34 years of my full functioning. But what I've been given instead, I would say, is of infinitely greater value. And I don't know, Jana, if you knew this, but recently there was someone interviewed on a well-known MECFS podcasty type thing who said it's a spiritual disease. And I really, really railed against that. I do not think it's a spiritual disease. I do not think if you've got it, it's a sign that you're somehow failing or unspiritual, or that the person said that people with this illness are completely detached from their own heart and soul. And I thought, That's just terrible. But is it a spiritual invitation? You bet it can be a spiritual invitation, and it can take you deeper, as you've already implied, deeper into the true nature of being an embodied spiritual being than almost any other experience that I can think of, because it's so systemic and it's so profound. It's so 24/7. It's like the Zen master that just won't let up, right?
That's right. There's no off button. Hey, stop. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the distinction that you're making about gift, about invitation, absolutely, there is an invitation there. And yeah, I agree with you. Wouldn't have had it. But the combination of having something that's so debilitating and also devastating to the ego, when you can't do, and your whole identity is wrapped up in what you do, even when you don't, you think, I thought I was doing better at not over identifying with doing. But my body, I learned more when my body got involved, when my body was always involved, obviously. And I would have the boom and bust things with rheumatoid arthritis and, living with chronic illness. Um, I, I could still get away with a level of ignorance, and not listening and not attending. But with this, it wasn't possible. And I guess it would be, it would still be possible. Like you could still, I guess what I'm coming to is this another distinction, which is the difference between material and physical. You can, if maybe I'll just make one up, if I don't know, but thinking of it now off the cuff, yeah, it's a physical illness, is a physical reality. It's physically happening to me. Definitely, fuck off on the spiritual disease. It's happening to my body. My spirit gets involved because I'm broken, I'm distressed, I don't understand this lack of capacity. And then different capacities make themselves known. And there is so much more there. Like for a long time, I participated in thinking and learning and practicing Jungian analysis and Jungian thought. And one of the big things with the thinking with Jung and analysis is that we sense there's more. And when we get to those points where, we're waking up in the middle of the night or things just aren't working and we're stuck, there's a part of us that knows there's more. And, a rock bottom experience, like all of your capacities seemingly evacuating the building, then to find out that there is more there physically, but materially, to support the physical. Does that make sense?
Totally. It does make sense, because they're your rendering spirit as matter, which is beautiful. It's just a different kind of matter. It's a different kind of materiality. And I think this is something that gets very overlooked when we have a spirit matter dichotomy or duality. Whereas actually, I think what we're talking about is different inflections or folds in a much more complex, multidimensional kind of materiality. I mean, I did read a book recently that posited energy as that which kind of brings matter and spirit in the more traditionally thought of sense together in a way that makes sense. It kind of makes new materialist sense of that relationship. And I think that's an interesting idea, one that I certainly want to think into more. But I think For me, the spiritual invitation here is about coming home. And it's about coming home to the self in many layers. It's about coming home to the body as this incredibly wise and loving, multiply emergent intelligence. So there's a real sense of, when you really get that, you can relax and trust. You can really trust that if you give your body what your body evolved to need, your body is more invested in your well-being than you are. Obviously, the body is us. Again, I'm talking about that in, relational kind of inflection that we have in our self-awareness. But the body itself is always leaning towards its own survival. And more than that, I would argue, its own flourishing. It only seems to junk flourishing when survival's at stake. When there's that moment. So there's coming home to the body as this wise and loving capacity to be a material being in a material world, and to do it in a way that allows flourishing. And when we really get that, we can stop thinking of the body as our energy, our enemy, our prison, our limitation, etc., etc. There's something about coming home to that. But then in what you were saying as well, there's something about coming home to the deepest layer of self. And now I'm talking about the kind of self beneath the ego, or the self that exceeds the ego, however you want to frame it, right? But the self that is empirically there as core state transformation work, which I'll come back to in a minute, has demonstrated. But that constant, radically equanimous awareness that is there as a form of radical contentment, radical joy leaning into bliss, even when other states exist in that space. So you can simultaneously be grieving and radically content, radically equanimous. There's a different relationship with the whole of our experience when we come home to that layer of being. And as you rightly say, it's kind of that where you go. When you go down, 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 that's where you end up. So coming back to core state transformation, I don't know if you know this, there are a couple of originally NLP practitioners who worked with clients, and what they would do is they would invite them to feel the feeling they're feeling. So let's say the client comes up and says, I'm feeling a lot of fear. They'll say, okay, just be with the fear, just enough to feel it, not to re-traumatize, but just to feel it. And then drop through the fear and notice what's underneath. And so they would do that, and they'd go, okay, there's anger. Okay, do the same. And they would take them down through these layers. And then eventually the layers would start changing into what we call positive states. So what's beneath the grief? Say, oh, profound love. Great. Be with the profound love. And you keep doing it until what they found was client after client after client went to this place of a kind of core state, hence the name, core state transformation, core state of kind of beingness. Or sometimes they'd frame it as God, sometimes they'd frame it as love. But the point is they could go no further. Whichever way they got there, whichever way they were framing it, they could go no further. And what they found was the underlying equanimous peace that passes all conceptualization, just there, right? And then the practitioners invite that state to be brought through all the other emotions. So in a sense, they're coming back up through the emotional chain, bringing that awareness, which obviously radically reframes and allows them in an embodied somatic way. And this is so important. It's in the body. It's not in the mind. It's in the body. It's in the emotional somatic field of being. That transformational movement up through the top, and then the issue's transformed. But not only is the issue transformed, there's that invitational strand homecoming. This is who you really are. Underneath it all, this is where it is. This is the rock bottom reality. So that homecoming in two senses to the body, which I think is the repository of this knowing. It's by going down in through the layers, and then the cellularity of awakening, the energetic nature of awakening, when actually the non-dual everything is one experience is lived in the body, not a conceptual trip, or a little head game that you're playing with yourself, or some imagining, felt and lived in the body, that's actually extraordinary. And to me, that's the ultimate healing, is when the body itself becomes the site of the level of self-realization in that way, and it's all thoroughly material.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautifully traveled, described, presented, shared. Thank you. The journey was happening as you were talking. And and firing on other cylinders as you were talking, thinking about there is this wisdom is present in traditional religions and spiritual systems. There's a lot layered over it. There's a lot of it that too has to be dug down to find. But also it's also right there on the surface, from my own tradition, which I say my own tradition, I'm what I have carried for a long time and worked with in different ways. And now it just comes back in these. So it's something to draw on in a conversation like this. I think of how Jesus healed people and in the stories. So there is a tradition where Jesus is a healer, and it's in the stories in the Bible and in the Gospels. And it is always very material, spits on mud, rubs eyes, but it's also it invites that journey that you've just described. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus literally asks, what do you want me to do for you? The person has to find within themselves that I saw when you were saying it, they have to go to that core state. So Jesus is asking, go in and find yourself, or the kingdom of heaven is within you, or there's always a looking in that it is quite physical. It's always materially described, being lowered on a mat through a ceiling, having, like it's just everything is very material, very present, very physical. And those things are a part of it, as is that core self. So there's a moment in these stories where the one's presence is required.
I love that.
And so it's not an external healing. There is a co-emergent, co-becoming, but your presence is required.
I love that. Your presence is required. And actually, that's a fantastic note to end on in a way, because that could be exactly what everyone listening who is remotely concerned with becoming a more whole being, and certainly those on this journey with fatigue, complex fatigue issues, healing, your presence is required. Presence to what? To self, to body, to world, to what's here, as you said, to what's on board, both what we regard as internally on board and externally on board, this earthling existence with all that is provided and the radical commitment the body itself has to its own well-being. Your presence is required. Very simple to that. And of course, being present means letting everything go, simply to be there, to be here, actually, more accurately, be here now, in this moment, this temporal moment, here, present, showing up fully, attuned, reflective, gently learning from the body itself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jana, for such a rich conversation.
Oh, it always is wonderful talking with you, Anna, and talking about these things. And I look forward to the conversations that come up from this, and what others think, and how this stimulates more conversation about this. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to be present, to these to be present in this together, with others. And I'm trying not to speak in a deficit by saying there aren't very many places to do this, but I'll just have to say it. There aren't very many places that invite this type of conversation, and you've created this space for it. And I thank you so much. And I look forward to what others bring into it, and what you hear back, and how the conversations continue.
Oh, me too. I'm really keen to hear what others, feel about this. And also, I feel like it's a really important conversation to have, particularly at this point in the 21st century, with the planet under the pressure it's under. Materiality itself is under enormous pressure, and that we need a collective awakening around the full implications of being embodied, and the intelligence of that, and the intelligence of materiality itself. And so I'm really, really grateful to you, Jana, for being able to have this conversation, because you've spent a long time reflecting on this, and I'm really, really grateful for the richness of your experience and your insights, both as a spiritual practitioner, as a scholar, and as a practicer of material engagements. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, absolutely. And I'll just say one quick thing, which is when you were talking about, when we say our presence is required, and I know from my own experience that I wanted to get away from what was happening in my body. I wanted to, and when you speak of what's happening with the planet, I just want to la, la, la. But it's really okay. It's okay to accept the invitation to be present, to all of that fatigue. And it's a beautiful, beautiful invitation. So,
yeah. So everyone, your presence is required.